It's been a tough couple of years as a Kiseki fan since Kuro 1 came out. While Crimson Sin was a neat sequel with some negatives, it couldn't follow up on the momentum that Kuro 1 had going for it. But Falcom just announced a new game in the series, Kaido Kiseki, and my excitement has been so uncontainable that I had to make a video about it. I'll be going over the information that Falcom themselves have already provided and some possible directions and ideas the game might use. What was originally tentatively called Kuro no Kiseki, the final chapter, ended up taking shape as this. Kai no Kiseki, fittingly deemed Kiseki's 20th anniversary title, starts off talking about how in 12:0x everything will end, referencing Epstein's prophecy Doomsday for Zemuria. It then follows it up with talking about how, as the Doomsday approaches, that Calvard plans to launch a rocket, and this is quite the event for all of Zemuria, as it will be their first collective journey into the Beyond. So we have a lot of forces gathering up at Orid, which will be quite the interesting beginning to the story if it is the introduction. There isn't much else to note here in the synopsis, besides the fact that they do mention the story will be following the Spriggan again, and a young adult at that, which is also confirmation that Van will be the main character. I don't know how some people thought that this is referring to a new main character, or that we've yet to wait on the confirmation that Van will be the main character. And, it totally isn't like Van has already been stated to be the main character for the third Kuro game by Kondo multiple times at that actually. First off, we're gonna talk about Orid and its significance as a setting. It has been mentioned in the series across various instances, so I'm curious to see how it operates as a technological hub. I'm also curious to see how MTSC operates here, as it is their base, and hopefully we learn more about how they have technology that rivals Ouroboros or their relationship with Roy. Another point of interest is that it is close to Remiferia on the map, so we will probably see some returning characters at Orid. It is also a gathering of many forces as stated, so we might see some returning characters like Olivier, Chloe, or Ellie as a representative of Crossspell. I would personally love to see Alan Richard from Sky, as he is one of my favorite characters and it's been forever since he last appeared. He was also asked to investigate Orid, so it is night time he reappears. Please, Falcom. And another thing is that Novartis was investigating Orid following the events of the Elysium. He sensed a disturbance there. We don't know what that was pertaining to, but I'm very curious to find out the answer in time. Let's also not forget that Rizet herself is from Orid, so we might learn more about her past here. Van has also been to Orid before, so we will be seeing old acquaintances again. Next, I will be talking about the screenshots that Falcom themselves posted on their site. Note that not all of these images will be representative of the same thing in the final version of the game. Falcom definitely hasn't fooled us with that trick before. First off, we have the Soldat that looks surprisingly similar to Valimar, but it has the Verne Industries logo stamped right onto it, so we can make a safe assumption that it is simply their attempt at recreating Valimar. Now, why would they? There is a pretty good idea as to why they would, because if we look back to Hajimari, we saw that Roy knows about the possibilities of the world, so he might have seen Reen and Valimar break out into the boundaries in an act of desperation. This is also quite likely since Kondo has hinted at it multiple times before in interviews. As for the pilot, we've no clue who it is yet. It could be Roy, as he did pilot the assault frame in Kuro 1, and it would be quite badass to see him doing that, but it also could be Van. A joke I would like to make here is that this is how the image looks now, but when it first got revealed, this is the only way I could see it. Next up is Bergard talking to Campanella. Bergard makes a remark about Campanella's appearance not changing here. Now, it is interesting to note that this implies Bergard has known Campanella for a while. I do think that the idea of Bergard being the fifth Anguisse is quite unlikely, so I won't be giving it much weight. The location they're talking in also seems to be quite interesting, but there's nothing else of note to be discussed here. Moving on. We have a blonde man in a black attire who we can presume to be Rufus. I'm really fucking glad to see him back, as he is one of my favorite main characters in this series. His text talks about being dejected at the idea of someone using a person who shouldn't exist. We can assume that Rufus is talking about himself here, but is he talking about his person or the image of Rufus Albaria? The idea of the image of Rufus Albaria being used is quite unlikely after Hajimari, so I'm very curious to see where this leads to. Now that he is back in proper person after Crimson Sin, where he just dropped a few lines, I really hope he has a bunch of neat character moments in Kai. There's also the idea of him perhaps inheriting the position of the 7th Anguisse, following Arya and Rod floating around. I do think that's far too unlikely to be real, so I also won't be focusing much on that. Next up, we have a set of pictures that are the Creil Village following the destruction of Kuro 1. Now, we do see some sort of corruption happening in the land to the far off. Is this the desertification phenomenon that everybody's trying to find an answer to within the series? In a second picture, we also see some crystals. I have no clue what this means. Lastly, but certainly not least, we see a figure in the background. Now, a lot of people think this is Kevin. I really hope it is Kevin, but I do think it's unlikely as hell that it is Kevin. I don't think Falcom would put him here. I do think it's more likely an NPC, but I do really fucking want Kevin back. He is my favorite MC in the series, only following Green. So if Kevin really is back, I would be damn geeked. But yeah, knowing Falcom, I don't think this is the signal yet, guys. We can cope though. Next up is here we go again. A character that I want to see more of more than anybody in this game, I think. Mostly because of how we've seen so little of the Grandmaster, with us being quite close to the ending of the series. So if we get another instance of Hajimari, where the Grandmaster appears for a few minutes, drops a few lines, and then we see them doing nothing of major notice, I will be severely disappointed. I do have some hope though, since they are in the first few images of the game, so maybe this time we won't be baited with Falcom's usual antics with the Grandmaster. The location is also of interest because it seems like the Marian Garden from Kuro 2. I don't know if they'll be appearing there, but I would prefer them to appear in Orid or an actual story relevant location. A lot is riding on them this game, as they should be enacting the Eternal Recurrence plan here. So yeah, I'm quite excited for that. But otherwise, really, I'm just glad to see the Grandmaster back. About 2 games and 4 years since Hajimari? Crossed fingers, hoping for the best. Last but not least is this picture of a woman at the presumably space base. Now, we do know that this is near confirmedly Hermes from Kuro 1 and 2. I'm quite excited that we will be seeing her true character in this game. She could perhaps be one of the astronauts or explorers, so to quote, riding on the rocket towards the beyond, if she is given enough importance to be in one of the first few images of the game. Regardless of what role she plays, I'm excited to see on how they build on her character carrying on from Crimson Sin. She was one of my favorite side characters and NPCs in the first 2 games. We also knew that she was in the military beforehand, so it isn't much of a surprise for her to be here. Her design's great, hopefully her character is too. As I was making this video, a new scan for Kai just dropped. The text says nothing of note besides this being quote unquote that this is Calvard's final chapter. Now that's a curious statement because I don't think that's necessarily true. We have 2 new images. The first one is Roy in what's presumably the space base, which makes me all giddy to see him in action. The next is Van in what looks like Creil. He doesn't have a redesign here, so I hope this is just concept art because I really want a new design for Van. But it's nice to see Creil here. We also see a more detailed image of the rocket, so I guess Space Kiseki is real. Now that I've discussed all the information that we do have about Kai that is concrete, I'm going to talk about ideas and theories and possible directions that Kai might take. First off, let's talk about the subtitle, Farewell, O Zemuria. Is something that catches your eye right away as a subtitle for the game. Now, this is definitely talking about one of two things. Either the nothingness that the Grandmaster mentioned in Cold Steel 4, or the doomsday that Epstein prophesied. Now, it's very likely that these two events are the same event, especially after Crimson Sin's ending, where we found out that the events of Crimson Sin are not the events of the doomsday that Epstein talked about. Keeping this in mind, I would like to draw some connections between Crimson Sin and Hajimari, which are more spiritually connected as games than you would think. Both games have an antagonist that is a technological singularity testing humanity, with Swin and Nadia as protagonists in some part, and Lapis taking a major figure. I don't think this was unintentional. I do think Falcom is trying to build up to something here, and it might be a possible connection between Hajimari and Kai. Now, we can talk about this connection right with Hajimari's final chapter, which is the end and the beginning. Now, an idea discussed in Hajimari is also the nothingness, be it through Ishmael Gareen or other instances. Now, if the nothingness is the end of Zemuria, it is quite fitting that the setting of it began in Hajimari, and the plotline will come full circle in Kai, tying both games together very neatly, as the precursor and the very event of the ending of Zemuria. When you look at Crimson Sin as a spiritual and thematical sequel to Hajimari, and it further elaborating the possible ties and connections to Kai, it makes Crimson Sin hold more weight as a game, despite it not progressing the overall plot much, so I'm really hoping this is true. Now, there is another layer to this that is even unlikelier to be canon. Let's get into that. I'm gonna talk about Nayuta now. Now, Nayuta is a game that we aren't sure of if it is indeed connected to the Kiseki canon, but it is a work that also discusses the boundary in its themes. Now, what other works discuss the boundary? We know Cold Steel 4 does, we know Hajimari does, and we know that Kuro also does, and Kai most certainly will. So, if this is true, we can also, to go a little further, look at the logos. Hajimari, Nayuta, and Kai share this sort of curved underline design style. Now, with Nayuta's case, it's more similar to other various logos in the Kiseki series. Though, in Hajimari and Kai's case, the design similarity is stronger, so I am hoping that this is visual symbolism for the boundary, but I do think I am most likely waffling here about similarities that weren't this deep. Still would be really neat if true. The more important possible connection to Nayuta is the fact that McBurn could be connected to the protagonist of Nayuta himself in some way. This connection hasn't really been built up much, but it is kind of likely if you are put into the perspective about how Zemuria is a lost civilization in the Nayuta game. Now, the Zemuria we know could end up a lost civilization in Kai, which makes the possible connection further more likely. But yeah, I would like more setup to the idea if it is true. It would be an incredible reveal if true, so fingers crossed again. Next up on interesting ideas for Kai is the most interesting idea in Crimson Sin, the 8th Genesis. Now, we know that the main function of the 8th Genesis is serving as a karma-observing engine and passing judgment on humanity's sins. But what's interesting here is the fact that the Genesis are supposed to replicate phenomena in reality. Now, does this mean that there is a real karma observer out there? We don't know, but I hope it is true. This could also allude to the fact that humanity's sins collecting and mounting up over the years is the reason that they're gonna face the nothingness. And perhaps Epstein wanted to warn us about that. It is kinda contradictory when you think about how the Genesis simply seem to hasten the process of humanity's approaching doomsday. So it is kind of weird to think about Epstein inventing them to try and save humanity, but it completely backfiring. Or perhaps humanity is simply doomed to nothingness no matter what they do, because the concept of an original sin that the humanity have is also very likely to be true. Now, is this original sin the reason we end up facing the nothingness? We don't know. The eternal recurrence plan might be a way to prevent humanity from facing the nothingness again, by having them loop over until this point again and again and again, before the original sin, or the collection of sins, gets humanity doomed to a fate of nothingness. This could also be a possible allusion to the true nature of humans the series has kind of hinted at. But yeah, as a footnote, I really do hope we do end up seeing the chaos that all 8 Genesis collected together can cause now that they are collected together. Would be a missed opportunity if we don't. Next up, I'm gonna talk about how we also have the possibility of the desertification and the Far East being connected to the Beyond. We know that Hamilton is one of the few people stated to be able to enter the Far East. We also know that Hamilton probably knows more about the Genesis than she's letting on to, as she is a disciple of Epstein. She also probably knows more about the Beyond than we do, as she also talks about preparing for a certain time in the end of Crimson Sin's DLC. Now, this certain time is definitely about the Doomsday approaching, but what has she prepared for it? Does it have to do with the Beyond, since she probably is involved with the space base? Are all answers I want in Kai, and hopefully this establishes a connection between the Beyond and the desertification through Hamilton, as this plot point is one of the ones I'm most looking forward to being explored in Kai. Amidst all this, we can remember Roy. We don't really know what his goals are yet, but he is one of the characters I'm most looking forward to in Kai. We also know that he will be a major figure in Kai. Now, we can think about how Epstein had unfinished business with the Beyond, and Roy, being related to him, might be trying to complete his unfinished business with the Beyond. If there's one thing the series has not been subtle about, it's that Epstein's research definitely led him to the Beyond. Perhaps he was punished for exploring too much into the truths of the world by the goddess. And that might be the reason that Epstein is missing in modern day. And perhaps Roy wants to pick up on that. Or Roy simply took his warning to heart as a part of his family and simply wants to do whatever he can to protect the world that Epstein tried to as well. But yeah, I'm really fucking curious to see what Roy is up to. I'm sure he's gonna be a special character in this game. Next up is the elephant in the room, the title, Kai. Why are they using Kai as a title? What significance does it hold? We do have some ideas based on the kanji. Now we can look at its possible readings here. The most important readings for Kai are World and Boundary, which is not surprising considering this series. Now, let's first talk about the reading of it as World, because if it is using a title shift like Zero to Azure, which made a lot of sense as you beat the games and look back at their narrative and what was important, Kuro Kai as a reading reads Dark World. This title could be a nod to how this is the first game where we enter the Beyond, a world most certainly we can think of as dark. This also might represent the fact that Zemuria might turn into a dark world after its boundaries are erased. And the third possibility I present is the fact that we might learn some kind of dark truth about Zemuria's nature, thus hinting at itself being the dark world. Now, the next reading we have for Kai is Dark Boundary. To support this possible reading, I'll use the chain imagery we had when Kuro 1 was revealed. This is referring to the infinite boundary that we saw in Kuro 1. Now, there is a prevalent idea throughout the series that the shackles of the goddess or chains of the goddess pose a limitation on humanity in Zemuria. And this chain or restriction might be the boundary itself in the series. Now, the Dark Boundary title could be read here as some sort of unholy protection that we didn't need from the goddess, as it is vaguely hinted that the goddess isn't all that we think they are. And similarly to Dark Quill, it could represent the boundary itself being corrupted or humanity's first expedition outside the boundary, as this light blue sphere we see in the title reveal and this light blue sphere beyond the Soldat are probably representing the boundaries of Zemuria and how Zemuria looks from outer space. That's all I have to say in regards to the title. My last note of significance is gonna refer to the Beyond the Reverie episodes. This is basically confirmed information at this point as well, but let's look at Forward Sword in Hand. Here, Elaine and Almata were relevant figures in the episode, and they were relevant figures again in Kuro 1. Next up, following an unconventional student, Ren and Dingo sort of took center stage in Kuro 2. Last but not least, another Hot Springs Paradise focused on Shizuna, who hasn't really done much of her character work in Kuro yet and is going to be relevant in Kai, which is a confirmed thing by Kondo. So now, this leaves us with one possible conclusion. Dread him, run from him, the goat arrives all the same. I can't tell you how ecstatic I am about the idea of Rin returning, not just because he is essentially my favorite character in this series, but also because him and Shizuna genuinely have some great build-up to how their dynamic can be explored as the light and dark side of Yunkafai's sword style. This possibly being a center idea of their relationship in Kai makes me so fucking excited, but knowing Falcom, Rin might not appear in this game, and this might not be explored even if he is, but I am quite optimistic that he will be in the game, and it makes me really fucking happy. The ending of the game is also something people are already discussing, as if we do venture into the Beyond in this game, it's quite likely it could end on a cliffhanger, and there is an unnamed Kiseki title in development. It could be the Sky remake, but it could be the 14th Trails game if this is a cliffhanger, because Falcom would want to follow it up quick. The idea of a cliffhanger is very funny, because I imagine it would be like Cold Steel 3, where we get to a major turning point in the series and it immediately cuts to credits. It would be a great ending, not just for the impact it would leave, but it would be a nice nod to the gradual progression from a continental conflict to a universal conflict, as the last time we had a cliffhanger ending, it was a continental conflict with the Twilight. But yeah, that was it for the video, guys. Thank you for watching it. I really appreciate people giving time out of their day to watch this, and thanks to all my friends who made this possible, no matter what the contribution was. I genuinely would not be able to make this video without all the help I received. The discussion around the Trails game before it releases is some of the most fun I have with online discussions. I started participating in these after I beat Cold Steel 4 when I was caught up to the series, and each time to Kuro and to Crimson Sin, it was a really exciting time. Even though Crimson Sin let me down in a lot of aspects, especially a certain theory I really wanted to be true not happening, I think Zolga was written quite well, so I can excuse them there. I understand why people dislike this phase, as a lot of theories that they deem to be right don't end up happening. As long as the alternate is well written and fitting, I don't really have a qualm, so this phase is really blissful to me. I dedicate this discussion and theory to my beloved Grendel, Zolga. May you rest in peace. I don't know if I will ever make a follow-up to this or a video about Trails ever again, but my excitement could not be helped after the Kai announcement, so I wanted to put it to something creative, and I'm glad I did. Peace.